I'm not really sure if you're ready to see this chaos. The first thing that I unpacked was the kitchen, and yet it has been over 6 months. We are still here in the pantry in boxes. I put up this shower curtain rod to kind of hide the chaos, but it's time to move on from this. New year, new pantry. Hi, I'm Liv, and welcome to the Leopard Lodge. If you're new here, this is a channel dedicated to creative projects in the home. I filmed the majority of this last fall, but I am revealing it to you in 2022 in the hopes of inspiring you to tackle some difficult spaces, get organized, and generally just make things look nicer. Just to bring you up to speed, last spring we moved into a new home, which was simply a dream compared to the tiny apartment we were holed up in for about 8 years. We more than doubled our square footage and got some beautiful new features, but there was still plenty of work to do. Namely, the pantry. A tiny little cutout between our very narrow kitchen and laundry room, but with plenty of storage potential. So you walk through the kitchen into this little area, and then it goes further into the laundry room. We can't even get into the laundry room right now. That is for another day. Upon moving in, we set up this tiny old bookcase that we had just to kind of temporarily shelve things. And other than that, we literally stacked boxes on top of other boxes on the floor in front of this little bookshelf. And we had been living that way for months and months and months. Ridiculous. So it's 2022 and it's time to fix this. So we're gonna put up chalk shelving back here, and that way we can adjust our shelves as necessary, because I can't tell you how many times in my life I've put up shelving and then decided that it wasn't right and I wanted to move it, and I put a million holes in the wall. So being able to grow and change with our pantry is gonna be really great. So chalk shelving is a great thing to utilize in a pantry where you're working with a lot of varying sizes of items. I am also going to leave some space on this side so that I can hang up a mop and broom holder. The plan was to install 6 shelves. The top 3 would be the full length of the wall, and the bottom 3 would be 3 feet long. This was to accommodate a space to hang up a mop and broom holder on the neighboring wall. The top 5 shelves were to be 1 foot deep, and the bottom shelf was to be a bit larger. The plan was to store things on the floor here, so I wanted the depth to be larger so that it would kind of hide those things better. Then we're going to use a variety of storage boxes and jars to keep everything neat and clean and organized, fingers crossed. And then on this side, over here, we have this little area here where we've been storing our trash cans and our broom and our compost. I'm not really loving this grocery list board thing anymore in this situation, so that is gonna go. Do you see how there's this little molding on this side in the kitchen? I want to extend that into this room so that it looks like it is part of that. And then I'm going to do a little wallpaper moment below that. This was somewhat of a money-saving hack. Peel and stick wallpaper is kind of expensive. I was really torn between doing this in black or the toffee, and I'm very happy with my decision to do it in the toffee. And while I would love to be able to wallpaper the entire pantry, I couldn't even really afford real wallpaper for this. I started my project off by measuring all of my wood carefully a couple of times just to be sure. According to my calculations, I need to turn this 6-foot board into 2 3-foot boards, and I need to trim a little bit off of these boards to get to 44 1/4, and then I just need one more 44 1/4. Then clamping it down and cutting it with my circular saw. Safety first. Even if you don't have a sawhorse, try to use 2 objects to hold the wood up level so that you don't wind up with any tearing while you cut. So I definitely just got sawdust in my eye. I had to go flush it out. So we're switching to these. All right. I sanded all of my pieces with 60 grit sandpaper. With wood prices still high and my budget for this project very low, the majority of the wood used here was recycled from older projects or things. So the wood wasn't necessarily in the best condition. Needless to say, there were a lot of holes to fill. I have this piece of wood that was up in my old place. I don't even know where I got this piece of wood, but we have these weird notches here, which is like very strange. I do not know why they're here, but I have this buildable wood filler from Dixie Bell called Dixie Mud. I don't know if we're gonna be able to fill this big of a gap, but we're gonna try. So I'm pretty sure this isn't stainable, so I may end up going back over it with some stainable wood filler, kind of caving through. So I'm gonna leave it like that and see how it dries, and then see if, I don't know, I can put another layer on or something. And this wound up being a several day process while I let layers dry before building on top of them again. We're gonna try putting some wood filler that I can stain on here. But eventually I got through it and had to sand again with 220 grit. If you are going to stain wood, I cannot recommend a pre-stain enough. Just make sure you follow the directions on the back of your can and you'll be good to go. Got staining gloves on. Also, wear gloves because you will stain your hands. So the directions say to mix it up and then apply it. This helps your stain go on smoothly and evenly and not be all blotchy, which is what we all want in the world, right? Sure, it takes a bit of extra work. You have to apply the pre-stain, wipe off the excess, let it dry for at least half an hour, and then sand it off. So I have to sand everything again. And then I can start staining. The wood filler turned out not too shabby on this part. And maybe you can tell that it's a lot better than it was, and at least there isn't just a giant chunk sticking out. That's awesome. But then I decided that I needed edge banding. I picked up some veneer edge banding. It's a pliable wood veneer that comes in a roll to make the edge of boards look nice and not raw. I've decided that this will be the shelf side up. This will be the part that faces down because it doesn't look quite as nice. This will be against the wall, and this will be against the wall as well. So it's really just this that I need to do. You can iron this onto your wood edges to give them a more finished look. You might recognize veneer edge banding from my yarn circle wall hanging video. You will remember that I utilized this stuff in a very non-traditional way. But now we're going to use it for its intended purpose. This is looking so much better. Look at that. This is extremely satisfying. For everyone out there who is like, oh, it's too much extra work, I don't want to do that, does it really matter? Just do yourself a favor and do it. It's really easy and it's really satisfying.
Well, you probably all already realized that my dumbass did this on the wrong side. And I put it on the back side where my notches are. So I'm gonna do that all again, except on the correct sides. Edge banded.
I think staining wood is one of those things that people find intimidating, but it's really not that difficult, especially if you do the pre-stain. Always do a test sample of your stain to make sure that you actually like it. On one side I have Ipswich Pine, and on the other side I have English Chestnut, and then 2 layers of English Chestnut. I have our under the sink curtain that covers it, and then we got our wallpaper. Looking at it in your space, especially with other elements of your design, can really help you make a more informed decision. I really prefer the English Chestnut over here to give it a little bit more depth. Much like the pre-stain, you basically rub the stain onto the wood, wait a few minutes, wipe off the excess, and apply a second coat if needed. Not too shabby. They kind of look just like wood knots. Each type of stain will come with its own set of instructions though, so definitely refer to that before you do it. You will still smell the fumes for a day or two, so try to do this in a well-ventilated area, ideally outside, and even more ideally if you can leave the piece outside for a couple of days just to let all of those fumes really blow off. I honestly recommend even wearing a mask when you're standing outside. I got a little bit of a headache even though I was in the great outdoors. Maybe not the great outdoors, but the great, whatever, you get the point. I was in my backyard. When the wood was finished, it was time to start hanging the shelving system. Luckily, I got this for free from a friend who got it for free on Facebook Marketplace, but couldn't use it. So that really helped out with the whole budget situation. Every bracket system is going to be different, so what I explain here will not necessarily be the same for whatever you try to do. Our system consisted of a bar that you attached to the wall horizontally and then hung the tracks from vertically. From there, you would attach your brackets to the track and put your shelves on top of the brackets. Due to the pre-existing holes in the bar, I couldn't necessarily line them all up with studs, so I had to use really heavy-duty anchors. The tricky part about using anchors is that I needed to know exactly where my holes were going to go before I screwed them in. So I had to use the existing holes on the bar to draw where the anchors needed to go, and then make sure everything was level, and then draw again, and then put the anchors in. Look at these anchors. This is the real deal. This is what you want. None of that plastic shit. This screws right in. Perfect. I had just learned about these anchors and they are amazing and I highly recommend them. They are so easy to use and just screw into the wall with your drill. Looking good. Then attach the bar to the wall using washers and screws. The tracks, however, needed to go into the studs because the anchors took specialty screws that were not long enough to go through the depth of the tracks. Yeah, that did not work. It was a frustrating journey to get there, but eventually I figured it out. Next, it was time to get the boards and screw them into the brackets. I had to leave 1.5 inch gap from the tracks to the back of the board. This was to ensure I had enough space to lift the shelf up in order to pull it out of the tracks if I wanted to change the height. Then it was time to clean things up a bit and bicker about shelf placement.
I know it like fits, but I'd probably raise it 2. Like having more room to grab would be good. Are you gonna raise the other one then?
I mean, I'm going to screw them into like...
Oh, I see.
This is why we did the bracket system, so we can change our minds.
Yeah.
Hot tip.
I get it.
No, you don't.
The plan here is to carry on this molding into this area. I got the correct sized board and I'm gonna cut it down and I'm just going to continue that on and paint it white. And then we'll be wallpapering below. What is gonna be a little bit tricky is that neither of these work and I can't really like remove them. So I think I'm gonna have to wallpaper as though they work and then just live with the fact that they're taking up space in my life and don't work. What are you gonna do? So let's get to cutting. To get started on the opposing wall, I double checked all of my measurements, cut down my wood to size. We fit. And now I've measured that from the bottom of here to the floor is 67.5 inches. And so I'm going to try to replicate that on this side. I doubt that this is all level though. So I'm gonna put one screw in and then see where we're at. I measured the same distance to the ground as the trim on the other side of the doorway. Fitted the wood to the wall and made sure it was level. Just to come down a hair. Luckily, it kind of wedged its way in and stayed on its own while I figured out the correct placement, which was very convenient. So that's level, but it's not level with this over here. Okay, so I just checked the levelness of the floor and it is about this exact same amount. To see if it looks lined up from here. And I'm thinking it's pretty good. Having already located and marked the studs off camera, I pre-drilled holes in the trim. And then secured it to the wall using screws. To make this totally renter friendly, I grabbed these cover caps to cover the screws because we're gonna paint this anyway. This just makes it totally reversible in case my landlord's like, I don't like that. I painted the trim white to match the existing wall. Brush is dead. To apply the wallpaper, which wasn't exactly wallpaper, I prepped the wall by giving it a light sand, cleaning it with simple green, and making sure it had thoroughly dried. Here I am with my very cool wallpaper. I have done peel and stick wallpaper once in an equally like weird, bumpy, janky wall. The wallpaper was actually contact paper. I found this design on Etsy and fell absolutely in love with it. I contacted the seller who also makes wallpaper and they wanted to charge me like a $75 fee for custom art, like a custom art fee. And I was like, you make this print and you make wallpaper, so I don't understand why you can't just sell me that. I had asked what the main differences were, and it didn't really seem like they were that different, except that the contact paper is printed with a border. So I'm gonna have to cut that part off, which might be a little bit tricky, but I have confidence in myself. So we're gonna hope this works. I think I might cut this part on another surface first. I'll be back. I'm not gonna say this was the correct decision. I probably should have just chosen another pattern and moved on, but I loved this print so much that I just insisted on doing it. This wall is not level.
I'm gonna try a slightly different approach because we're on slant. I'm going to find the center point. I'm gonna do the center first, and then I'm gonna line up the two edges. Ugh, it's so wrinkly. This tool is dead to me. What a waste of money. First sheet is up. I don't know if it is because I'm using contact paper instead of wallpaper, or that my wall is so insanely bumpy, but there are definitely some wrinkles in here, and I don't know if there's anything I can do about it. I mean, it's okay, but there's no turning back now, right? I think if I'd used real peel and stick wallpaper, this would have worked better. Eventually, not without some bumps, pun intended, I got the wall finished. There was definitely some weird creasing in the paper, but all in all, from afar, at least, it looks pretty good. And I do still love this pattern. So it was time to put everything back on the shelves and pull the space back together. A great way to add texture and visual organization is to transfer all of your dried goods into jars. Not to mention that buying in bulk is more economical anyway. This is not a new idea, but when it comes to kitchen and pantry makeovers, I often see people decanting things into jars that are all the same. I personally am not a big fan of this. Namely because you have to go out and buy all new jars, which feels wasteful. But also if you find yourself needing more at some point and then they've discontinued that jar, what are you to do? I'm certainly a fan of the classic mason jar. I think that the use of these got a little bit out of hand in the early and mid 20-teens, and they started getting used for all kinds of weird stuff. But food storage, that's what they were made for. They always make the same sizes, you can always get them, and they're also easy to thrift. You don't even have to buy them new. You can also use jars from food items that you've already purchased. You just have to put in the elbow grease of getting the old labels off and making sure they're all clean. I am pretty particular about what jars I will use though. Not just any old jar is gonna make the cut. So be selective and only choose ones that you like. On the whole, the choice is more sustainable, and I find that there is more visual interest from using varying sizes and shapes as opposed to something that's all the same. The way you tie the whole thing together is with labeling. If everything is labeled the same, it will look more uniform and intentional. Otherwise, it's just gonna look like a mess. I like to use my old school vintage embossed label maker, but there's so many label making choices out there these days that you can do a number of things here. You can purchase just sticky labels online and hand write out in Sharpie. You can get a modern label maker. If you like to switch up the contents of your jars often, you could paint a little swatch with chalkboard paint and write out the contents with a chalk marker. Or if you own one of those Cricut machines, you could do a lot with that. I would love to play with one of those. In case you're watching Cricut, just a couple of ideas for you. I'm sure there's so many more. You can add baskets to hide all of your backup dried goods, as well as any other unsightly items that will make your space feel cluttered. While putting everything together, a lot of this was just playing around with the layout, putting something somewhere, taking it down, moving it around, putting it back where it was before, arguing with Tom about where things should go, but we figured it all out. I hung up my mop and broom holder, a hook for my apron, and completed any other finishing touches that I felt were necessary. And that finished off my pantry makeover. Let me know in the comments what your favorite part of this project was, and please give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. It really helps the channel, truly. I will link all of the products that I can below in the description. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye. Back to ruin my pantry again.
Sorry you don't like the quote-unquote ugly peanut butter containers.
I don't like the ugly peanut butter containers. They're really in my way. You need to get a prettier peanut butter.